It started as just another quiet night shift. Dispatch had sent me out to check on a disturbance call. Routine stuff. Some teenager's party getting too loud, I assumed. The address led me to a crumbling old house on the edge of town, isolated and half-eaten by the forest. When I arrived, the place was dark. Too dark. The kind of dark that swallows your flashlight beam. The front door was ajar, creaking lazily in the night breeze. I radioed in my arrival, but static crackled back instead of dispatch's usual monotone confirmation. Strange. It wasn't like this area was a dead zone for the radios. As I pushed the door open further, the hinges screamed. My flashlight scanned the inside, a gutted living room filled with cobwebs and furniture draped in dusty sheets. There were no signs of a wild party, just silence so thick it pressed against my chest. "Police!" I called out, my voice breaking the eerie calm. No response, just the faint sound of something dripping deeper in the house. That's when I noticed the footprints, muddy, barefoot tracks leading from the door into the shadows. The dripping sound grew louder as I followed the tracks through a narrow hallway. My boots echoed unnaturally loud against the wood floor. Every creak felt like a warning. Then the smell hit, coppery and sharp. Blood. I stepped into a room at the end of the hall and froze. There was a circle of candles on the floor, their flames dancing erratically, like they were caught in some invisible storm. Inside the circle lay a body, a man, his throat slit so deeply his head hung at an unnatural angle. His lifeless eyes were wide open, staring up at the ceiling as though he'd died, seeing something unimaginable. I had to fight the urge to bolt. Instead, I leaned in to get a closer look. That's when I saw it. A word scrawled on the floorboards in blood, directly beneath him. "Welcome." It was fresh, dripping into the cracks of the wood. And then, from somewhere deeper in the house, I heard the laughter. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The figure in the live feed was a perfect reflection of me, down to the uniform, the flashlight, and even the strained expression on my face. Yet, here I was, standing in the station. Dana's hands trembled as she turned the monitor toward me. "I called for backup when you didn't respond. They went to the house and found your car still there, but no sign of you." "That's impossible," I whispered. My heart pounded as a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if I never left that house? The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I glanced at my reflection in the station's glass door. My breath caught in my throat. The reflection wasn't following my movements. While I stood frozen, it leaned closer to the glass, its eyes dark pits. "I think I'm losing it," I murmured, stepping back. Dana gasped, her eyes darting from me to the screen. The figure in the live feed was moving now, slowly raising a hand to wave at the camera. At the same moment, my reflection in the glass mimicked the gesture. I hadn't moved. My radio crackled to life, a distorted voice cutting through the static. "Officer down. Officer down. Request backup at Willow Street." The voice was mine. I bolted for the door, but before I could reach it, the lights in the station flickered and went out. The only illumination came from the glow of the live feed, which now showed not just one figure, but several. They crowded the windows of the house, all identical to me, their faces twisted in mockery. Dana screamed, and I turned to see her backing away from her desk. A shadow darker than anything I'd ever seen was stretching from the corner of the room, oozing across the floor like liquid night. It reached for her, tendrils curling around her ankles. "Help me!" she cried, her voice breaking. I lunged forward, grabbing her arms and pulling with all my strength, but the shadow was relentless, dragging her inch by inch. Her eyes widened in terror as it pulled her into the darkness. Her scream cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. I stumbled back, panting, the room now eerily still. The monitors were dead, the radio silent. I was alone, or so I thought. Behind me, the floor creaked. Slowly, I turned. In the dim light, I saw them. Figures identical to me, standing in a line, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting some unseen light. "You don't belong here," one of them said, its voice a distorted version of mine. I backed away, reaching for the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. The figures advanced, their movements synchronized, their expressions blank. "This isn't real," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "This isn't real." One of the figures smiled, a grotesque, unnatural stretch of its mouth. "It is now." With no other option, I turned and threw myself at the glass door, shattering it. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked at the station's edge. I drove aimlessly, my hands trembling on the wheel. The town seemed different, the streets unfamiliar. No matter where I turned, I couldn't find my way home. Eventually, I stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of town. The attendant gave me a strange look as I stumbled inside. "Rough night, officer?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He slid a newspaper across the counter. "You might want to see this." My blood ran cold as I read the headline. "Police officer found dead in abandoned house on Willow Street." The photo beneath it was of me. I stumbled back, the world spinning around me. "That's not possible," I muttered. "I'm right here." The attendant frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Sure you are, buddy." I turned and caught my reflection in the station window. My face stared back, but my eyes, they weren't mine. They were dark, bottomless voids. And then, just for a moment, I smiled. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my cruiser's radio. "Unit 22, report to Old Pinecrest Road. Suspicious activity, possible break-in at the abandoned Kavanaugh estate. Caller reports strange lights inside." I exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel. The Kavanaugh estate, a relic of local legend. It had been abandoned for decades, ever since the last Kavanaugh family member vanished without a trace. People whispered stories about it, about hauntings, cults, even aliens, but I'd always chalked it up to small-town boredom. Still, I was already 10 hours into my shift and didn't need the adrenaline rush this call promised. I pulled up to the estate a few minutes later. The house stood like a specter in the fog, its windows gaping like empty sockets. My spotlight cut across the overgrown lawn, revealing nothing but mist and weeds. Yet the front door, swollen and warped from years of neglect, was ajar. The radio crackled again. "Backup ETA 15 minutes. "Roger that," I muttered. 15 minutes? A lot could happen in 15 minutes. I stepped out of the car, hand on my sidearm. Every cop instinct screamed at me to wait, but the faint flicker of light from inside drew me forward. Maybe it was just kids messing around, or squatters. Yeah, squatters. That's what I told myself. The porch creaked under my boots as I approached the door. The light was faint now, like a candle being carried deeper into the house. I drew my flashlight and shined it through the opening. Dust floated thick in the beam, and the air smelled damp, like mildew and rot. "This is the police," I called out, voice steady despite the chill crawling up my spine. "If anyone's in there, make yourself known." Silence answered me, stretching long enough to make me doubt the call. Maybe the homeowner just thought they'd seen something. But then, faint and distant, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and too far away to belong to anyone who'd just bolted for the back door. I stepped inside, every creak of the floorboards announcing my presence. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with warped paneling and doors hanging on rusted hinges. My flashlight swept across an old mirror, cracked and tarnished, reflecting my face back at me in distorted fragments. The light flickered again, deeper in the house. The footsteps continued, growing louder and heavier, like boots dragging across the floor. They didn't seem hurried, but steady, purposeful. I tightened my grip on my sidearm and moved toward the source. Each step I took felt wrong, as though the house itself wanted me gone. The air grew colder, the damp smell giving way to something sharper, metallic, like blood. I reached the base of a grand staircase, its banister twisted and blackened from years of rot. The light was coming from above now, a faint glow at the top of the stairs. My mouth felt dry as I called out again. "This is the police. I'm armed. If anyone's up there, come down slowly with your hands where I can see them." Nothing. The sound of footsteps resumed, this time from the second floor. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as they moved, pacing back and forth above me. I stepped onto the first creaking stair, and as I did, the pacing stopped. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper reached my ears. I froze, straining to make out the words, but they didn't sound like any language I knew. They weren't words at all, just a low, rhythmic murmuring. I ascended the stairs, my flashlight beam bouncing with each shaky step. The hallway at the top stretched into darkness, lined with more rooms, all of their doors slightly ajar. The light was coming from the farthest room, its door fully open, casting a faint, flickering glow into the hallway. As I approached, the murmuring grew louder, almost chanting now, but still incomprehensible. The words crawled into my ears and settled there, twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but my legs kept moving, carrying me toward the door. The room was empty, save for a single object in the center. An old, cracked mirror, its surface glowing faintly with a light that had no source. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't quite right. The face was mine, but the eyes were too wide, the expression too calm, and then it smiled. I stumbled back, heart hammering as my reflection stepped forward. I raised my flashlight, its beam cutting across the mirror's surface, but the image remained clear, untouched by the light. The thing that looked like me reached out, pressing a hand against the glass, and I swear I felt it on my chest, a cold, hollow pressure pushing me back. The mirror cracked suddenly, a spiderweb of fractures racing across its surface. The chanting stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I stood frozen, waiting for something, anything to happen. The house erupted in noise. Every door in the hallway slammed shut, one after the other, the echoes shaking the floor beneath me. A gust of icy wind blasted through the hallway, extinguishing my flashlight and leaving me in total darkness. I fumbled for my radio, breath coming in ragged gasps. "This is Unit 22. I need backup immediately. There's something in here with me." My voice cracked as I spoke, but I didn't care. I wasn't staying in that house another second. As I turned to flee, a hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing my arm. It was ice cold, the grip impossibly strong. I twisted, trying to break free, and the beam of my flashlight flickered back to life, illuminating the hallway. No one was there. I bolted down the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. The front door loomed ahead like salvation, and I didn't stop running until I burst outside, gasping for air. My cruiser's lights were a welcome sight in the fog. I jumped in, locked the doors, and waited for backup, every nerve on edge. When the other units arrived, they found nothing. The house was silent, still, and empty. No lights, no sounds, no broken mirror, just dust and decay. They looked at me like I was losing my mind, but I didn't care. I quit the force 2 weeks later. Some nights, though, when I close my eyes, I hear those whispers again. And sometimes, in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of something that isn't quite me, smiling back. I tried to move on after that night. I told myself it was the stress, the fatigue, my mind playing tricks on me. That's what everyone else said when I told them pieces of what happened, carefully leaving out the parts no one would believe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't stress. It wasn't a hallucination. I moved out of town shortly after quitting the force, hoping that putting distance between myself and the Kavanaugh estate would quiet the whispers. For a while, it worked. I found a quiet town, took a desk job, and even started sleeping through the night again. The memories dulled, became less sharp, less immediate, until tonight. It started with the mirror in my bathroom. I was brushing my teeth, lost in thought, when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the dim light, a smudge on the glass or a shadow cast by the streetlight outside. But it wasn't. The reflection in the mirror wasn't me. The figure staring back was me in shape and form, but hollow, lifeless. Its eyes were wide and too bright, like glass marbles catching the light, and its mouth was twisted into that same unnerving smile. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, as it tilted its head slightly, observing me like I was the one out of place. My chest tightened, panic clawing its way up my throat. I stepped back from the mirror, and as I did, the reflection moved forward, pressing its palms against the glass, just like before. I stumbled out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut, heart hammering like it would burst out of my chest. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat in the living room staring at the bathroom door, my phone clutched in my hand. Should I call someone? Who? The police? What would I even say? By dawn, I convinced myself it had been another stress-induced hallucination. That's all it could be. I needed to get out of the house, clear my head. I grabbed my keys and headed to my car, desperate to feel the sun on my skin and the world around me again. But when I turned to lock my door, I caught sight of something in the corner of my eye. The bathroom window, small and square, was fogged up, as though someone had breathed on it. And there, slowly fading, were the words written in the condensation. "You can't run." My blood turned to ice. My body locked up, and for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. The wind picked up around me, carrying a faint, almost melodic whisper. It was the same rhythm I'd heard in that cursed house. That voice I'll never forget. I ran to my car and didn't stop driving until I was hours away. Even now, sitting in this motel room, writing this down, I feel like something is watching me. The mirror above the dresser has been covered with a blanket, but every time I look away, I feel its presence, as if it's daring me to lift the cover, to see what's waiting on the other side. I don't know if I'll sleep tonight, or ever again. I don't know if I'll stay in this town, or keep running. But what I do know is this: the thing in that house, in the mirrors, isn't finished with me. It let me go once, but I don't think it's going to let me go again. If you ever hear about the Kavanaugh estate, if anyone tells you about strange lights or whispers, or the mirrors inside, do yourself a favor. Don't investigate, don't be curious, and whatever you do, don't look too long into your reflection. You might not like what looks back. It started with a call I shouldn't have taken. The dispatcher's voice was steady, but had that edge of controlled panic they usually reserve for the worst kinds of scenes. "We have a code 99, downtown, Maple Avenue and 6th Street. Units are en route. but your proximity makes you the first responder. I was off duty, at home, sitting in front of a half-eaten pizza, feet up, my phone on speaker. But that code, a code 99, is a mandatory officer in distress situation. It doesn't matter if you're off duty or halfway across the state. You go. I grabbed my badge, slipped my off-duty piece into its holster, and bolted out the door. My heart thudded harder with every red light I ran. Code 99S don't just mean trouble. They scream chaos, danger, and sometimes a body count. When I pulled up to Maple and 6th, it wasn't the scene I expected. The squad car was empty, parked haphazardly in the middle of the street with the driver's side door open. Its lights were still flashing, casting blue and red strobes that danced off the darkened windows of the closed storefronts. No officer in sight. I radioed in. Unit 2034 responding to code 99. No visual on the officer. What's the situation? The line crackled, but there was no reply. I leaned into the cruiser and scanned the interior. Everything was intact. Radio, body cam, sidearm mount. No signs of a struggle, but there was something off. The air inside the car smelled metallic, sharp, almost like the sting of ozone before a lightning strike. That's when I noticed it. The camera mounted on the dashboard wasn't recording forward-facing traffic. It had been swiveled around, pointing into the back seat, and the screen was still on, showing a frozen frame of something. I leaned closer. At first glance, it looked like a face, a blurry, distorted face with wide, vacant eyes and a mouth that stretched open like a scream caught mid-gasp. But the more I stared, the less human it seemed. The features were warped, smudged, almost as if it had been photographed through rippling water. My stomach knotted. It wasn't a reflection. The camera wasn't facing anything reflective. Whatever it was there. I stepped back from the cruiser, my pulse hammering in my ears. The street around me was silent, unnaturally so. Even in the dead of night, you expect the faint hum of distant traffic or the rustle of leaves. But here, nothing. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I radioed again. Dispatch, Unit 2034. I need backup at Maple and 6th. The officer is unaccounted for, and there's something unusual here. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The static hissed. Then the faintest whisper broke through. It wasn't dispatch. It was lower, rougher, like sandpaper dragged over stone. Help me. I froze. Who is this? Identify yourself. The voice came again, weaker now, but laced with urgency. In the alley. I turned toward the narrow alley, beside a boarded-up diner. The flashing cruiser lights barely penetrated the gloom, casting faint, distorted shadows on the brick walls. Every instinct screamed at me to wait for backup, but I couldn't shake the image of that face frozen on the dash cam. If someone was in danger, I had to act. I drew my gun and flashlight, stepping cautiously into the alley. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing scattered trash and graffiti-covered walls. At first, it seemed empty. Then I spotted movement. A figure slumped against the far wall, just outside the range of my light. Police. Show me your hands, I called, moving closer. The figure didn't respond. As I approached, my flashlight illuminated a uniform. The missing officer. He was sitting upright, his head tilted back against the wall, eyes open, but unfocused. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Relief flooded me for a moment, but it was short-lived. His radio crackled at his side. I crouched and reached for it, but before I could grab it, his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. His eyes snapped to mine, wide and wild. "Don't let it touch you," he rasped. Before I could ask what he meant, the air around us changed. A deep, bone-deep chill settled in, and the shadows at the far end of the alley seemed to ripple, as if alive. My flashlight flickered. Then I saw it. At first, it looked like just another shadow, darker than the rest, slinking along the ground. But as it approached, it began to rise, taking shape. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its face, or what should have been a face, was featureless, save for those same empty, gaping eyes I'd seen on the dash cam. The officer let go of my wrist, slumping back, his strength gone. I scrambled to my feet, raising my weapon. "Stop, don't come any closer." My voice echoed uselessly in the confined space. It didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. The thing moved with the inevitability of a tide, closing the distance between us in horrifying silence. I fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The shots rang out, deafening in the alley. But the thing didn't even flinch. The bullets passed through it, punching harmlessly into the brick wall behind it. Then it reached for me. I stumbled back, tripping over the officer's legs, and fell hard onto the pavement. The thing loomed over me, its shadow engulfing mine. My flashlight flickered one last time and died, plunging us into darkness. But even without the light, I could feel it. An overwhelming presence pressing down, suffocating, consuming. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was those hollow eyes staring into mine, endless and empty. I woke up to the harsh glare of daylight and the blaring sirens of approaching squad cars. I was lying in the middle of the street, the cruiser still parked where I'd left it. The officer was gone. So was the thing. The responding units found me dazed and barely coherent. They chalked it up to stress, maybe exhaustion. No one believed me when I tried to explain. The dashcam footage, wiped clean. No trace of the face I'd seen. No record of my encounter. It was as if nothing had happened. But it did happen. I can still feel its eyes on me, even now, in the quiet moments when I'm alone. It's out there, waiting, lurking in the shadows. And every time I close my eyes, I hear that voice again. Help me. It was supposed to be a quiet escape, a weekend alone in a cabin deep in the woods, no distractions, just me, a few books, and the endless sound of leaves brushing against the wind. I had rented the place off a small website that specialized in remote getaways. No ratings, no reviews, but the photos sold me. It looked peaceful, and God knows I needed peace. I arrived just before sunset, and everything seemed perfect. The cabin stood in a clearing, surrounded by tall pines that swallowed most of the sky. There was a creek nearby, and the air smelled of moss and damp earth. Inside, it was cozy, a wood-burning stove, a single bed, and an old oak table by a window overlooking the woods. But the first oddity? The key wasn't where the owner said it would be. The email instructions were clear. Keys under the mat. It wasn't. I ended up finding it inside the mailbox, and while that wasn't too strange, it still gave me pause. Who leaves keys in a mailbox? Shaking it off, I unlocked the door, dropped my bag, and settled in. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, I was already sipping a cup of tea and flipping through a novel. It felt like the beginning of the tranquility I'd been chasing. That peace didn't last long. Just as darkness enveloped the cabin, I heard the sound, a faint rhythmic tapping. I froze, straining my ears. It came from the window by the oak table, a soft yet deliberate knock, 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 as if someone, or something, was using a single finger to tap the glass. I turned slowly, heart pounding. There was nothing there. Just blackness, no moonlight, no stars, just an impenetrable void. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a branch, and forced my attention back to the book. The tapping stopped, but 5 minutes later, it started again. This time, from the front door. I didn't get up. Something deep in my gut told me not to. Instead, I grabbed my phone and checked for signal. No bars. Figures. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. The tapping ceased. A long silence followed. Then, as if it was mocking me, the sound moved to the back door. Knock, knock, knock. I wanted to laugh at how cliché it was. I even muttered to myself, "You're imagining things." But I knew I wasn't. The sound was too real, too calculated. Gathering my courage, I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and approached the back door. My hand shook as I reached for the knob, the beam of light jittering across the wood. When I finally opened it, there was nothing. Just darkness and the quiet hum of the forest. Then I looked down. Footprints. They weren't human. The prints were elongated, with claw-like marks digging into the soft dirt. My heart dropped. They led away from the cabin, disappearing into the blackness of the trees. I slammed the door and locked it. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to leave, but my car was parked half a mile down the dirt road. No way was I walking through those woods at night. I decided to wait it out, sitting in the middle of the room with every light in the cabin on. Hours passed, and nothing happened. No more tapping, no more footprints. By 3 a.m., I convinced myself I'd overreacted, that it was probably an animal, and I was being ridiculous. I managed to fall asleep. Then I woke up to the sound of breathing. It was faint, shallow, and right outside the bedroom window. I didn't move, didn't even breathe myself. My eyes darted to the clock. 4:13 a.m. The breathing grew louder, more labored, and then something scraped against the window. My stomach churned as the scraping turned to a low, guttural growl. I reached for the flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. Instead, I crept out of bed, moving silently toward the window. I positioned myself just out of sight, and with one swift motion, pulled back the curtain. The flashlight beam revealed a face. It wasn't human. The skin was pale, stretched tightly over a skull-like structure. Its eyes were black voids, reflecting the beam like polished obsidian. The mouth, filled with jagged teeth, was impossibly wide, and it twisted into something that could only be described as a grin. I screamed, dropping the flashlight as the creature lunged at the glass, its claws raking against it. The window didn't break, but the force of its attack sent me scrambling backward. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag, threw on my boots, and bolted out the front door. I didn't care about the woods, or the dark, or the footprints. Anything was better than staying in that cabin. As I sprinted down the dirt road, I could hear it behind me. Its guttural growls and heavy, uneven footsteps grew louder, closer. I didn't dare look back. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. The creature's growls were just feet away when I finally got the door open and threw myself inside. I started the engine and peeled out of there, the tires kicking up gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing in the middle of the road, its wide grin illuminated by the red glow of my taillights. I drove straight to the nearest town and didn't stop until I was parked in a well-lit gas station. I spent the rest of the night in the car, locked with the engine running, until the sun came up. I told myself I'd call the cabin owner, demand an explanation, maybe even report what I'd seen, but I never did, because deep down, I knew no one would believe me. And honestly, I don't want to know what that thing was. I didn't go home that morning. Instead, I drove aimlessly, putting as much distance as possible between me and that cabin. Every so often, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing following me down the road. But the road remained empty, save for the occasional car or truck. After about 3 hours of driving, I pulled into a diner off the highway. My hands were still trembling as I sipped a cup of coffee, the warmth doing little to settle my nerves. The waitress noticed my state, but thankfully she didn't ask questions. I couldn't have answered them if she had. Once I felt steady enough, I pulled out my phone. Despite the terrible signal, I managed to search for the rental website. But when I typed in the address of the cabin, something strange happened. The listing was gone. No photos, no description, nothing. It was as if it had never existed. A chill ran down my spine. How could that be? I checked my email for the confirmation details, the payment receipt, anything to prove I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The emails were gone, completely wiped from my inbox. I stared at the screen, trying to process what this meant. My mind raced with possibilities. Had the owner taken it down after what happened? Did someone erase it deliberately? Or was it something worse? Something I couldn't begin to understand. As I sat there, the events of the previous night played over and over in my head. The tapping, the footprints, the creature's face, and that grin. God, I'd never forget that grin. It wasn't just a predator's smile. It was knowing, as if it took pleasure in my terror. By the time I left the diner, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to talk about it. Not to the police, not to friends, not to anyone. People wouldn't believe me, and honestly, I didn't want them to. The last thing I needed was someone curious enough to go looking for that place. For weeks after, I had nightmares. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing that guttural growl or feeling the weight of those black, empty eyes staring at me. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind, some bizarre hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But deep down, I knew better. About a month later, something happened that shattered whatever flimsy logic I'd been clinging to. I was at a friend's housewarming party, trying to force some normalcy back into my life. I'd been avoiding social gatherings, but this one felt safe. Just a few familiar faces, some drinks, and no mention of cabins or woods. For a while, it worked. I almost felt like myself again. Then someone new arrived, a friend of a friend. He was tall, lanky, and a little awkward. Nothing unusual. But as he stepped into the room, I felt my stomach drop. There was something about the way he moved, the way his eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. It reminded me of something I couldn't quite place. And then he smiled. It wasn't the same grin, not exactly, but there was an echo of it in the way his lips curled, just a little too wide, his teeth just a little too sharp. I froze, my drink slipping from my hand and shattering on the floor. The room went silent as everyone turned to look at me. The stranger's eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I swore I saw something flicker in their depths, something dark and endless, like the void outside that cabin window. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice perfectly normal, perfectly human. I muttered an apology, blaming the spilled drink, and quickly excused myself. But as I left the party, I felt his gaze follow me all the way to the door. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew where I'd been, what I'd seen, maybe even what had followed me back. That was a year ago. I moved to a new city after that, far from any woods or cabins. I keep to myself, avoiding crowds and strangers, and I never ever let myself be alone at night. But every so often I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that moves just a little too fast, or a figure standing too still in a crowded place. And when I look, it's gone. I don't know what I brought back from that cabin, or if it was ever truly gone in the first place. All I know is this: Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The cabin wasn't supposed to be rented out that night. That's what the guy at the front desk mumbled, his eyes darting nervously between me and the old reservation book. "Ah, yes. We had a cancellation," he said, sliding the key across the counter without meeting my gaze. You'll have it all to yourself." That's what I wanted, a secluded retreat in the middle of nowhere. It had been a rough year, and the idea of quiet solitude in a rustic, isolated cabin seemed like a perfect way to reset. Still, his hesitation nagged at me as I drove up the winding gravel path into the woods. The cabin sat on a ridge overlooking a dark, still lake. It looked just as advertised, cozy, weathered, and welcoming. But as I parked my car and stepped out into the cold air, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Something about the way the trees seemed to close in, the utter lack of sound, felt wrong. Shaking it off, I hauled my bags inside and locked the door. The interior was just as quaint as I'd hoped. A stone fireplace, hand-carved furniture, and a creaky old staircase leading to a loft bedroom. The only oddity was the massive antique mirror mounted above the fireplace, its ornate frame gleaming in the flickering light of the single lantern I'd brought in. I remember thinking it didn't fit the rustic aesthetic. It was too grand, too heavy, almost regal. Its reflective surface seemed to suck up the dim light, making the room feel darker. I shrugged and lit the fire, settling in for what I thought would be an uneventful night. The fire crackled warmly, its glow casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Despite the warmth, an unease I couldn't shake lingered. It wasn't the isolation, I'd craved that, but the oppressive quiet. No wind in the trees, no chirping insects, not even the gentle lap of the lake against the shore. It was as if the world beyond the cabin didn't exist. I chalked it up to nerves and poured myself a drink, sinking into the worn armchair by the fire. The mirror loomed above me, reflecting the flames in a strange, warped way. I tried to ignore it, but my eyes kept drifting back, drawn by a flicker of movement. Something in the reflection, just at the edge, didn't match the room. I leaned forward, squinting at the mirror. Behind me, the reflection showed a faint shadowy figure standing near the staircase. My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned my head. Nothing. Just the empty staircase. I laughed it off, a trick of the light, I told myself. The whiskey playing games. I decided to head to bed. Climbing the creaky stairs, I tried to ignore how the air seemed heavier, thicker, as if the cabin itself was exhaling around me. The loft bedroom was cozy, the bed piled high with heavy quilts. I crawled in, pulling the covers tight, but sleep didn't come easily. Every sound seemed amplified, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the faint rustle of the trees outside, and footsteps. No, that was impossible. I froze, listening intently. There it was again. Soft, deliberate, moving across the cabin floor below me. My throat went dry. I had locked the door, hadn't I? Quietly, I slipped out of bed and crept to the edge of the loft. Peering down into the living room, my stomach churned. The fire had gone out, leaving the room in darkness, except for the mirror. It shimmered faintly, like a pond catching moonlight, and in its surface, I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, moving in the room below, their shapes vague and wrong. They didn't walk. They drifted, their limbs too long, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the edge of the rug. The noise echoed through the cabin, and instantly all movement in the mirror stopped. Every figure turned, their hollow eyes locking onto me. Then, one by one, They began to climb the stairs. Panic surged through me. I ran to the bed and grabbed the lantern, its feeble light casting weak beams into the dark. The footsteps were louder now, impossibly heavy. I could hear the wood groan under their weight. I didn't wait to see what would emerge from the shadows. I bolted for the window. I threw it open, the icy air biting my face. The drop wasn't far, maybe 10 feet, but the ground below was jagged with rocks and tree roots. Behind me, I heard the creak of the top step. No time. I jumped, landing hard and rolling painfully onto my side. For a moment, I lay there, gasping, until I heard them again. The footsteps now outside, crunching on the gravel path behind me. I didn't look back. I ran, crashing through the woods, branches clawing at my face and arms. The forest felt endless, the trees pressing in from all sides. I stumbled into the lake's clearing, its black water rippling faintly in the moonlight. My car was just ahead, parked near the edge. I could see the faint glint of its windshield. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder, faster. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking as I yanked the door open and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, spinning it around on the narrow path. In the rear-view mirror, I saw them, standing at the tree line, their shapes blending with the shadows. They didn't follow, just stood there, watching as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until the sun rose, until the sight of other cars and open fields reassured me I was back in the world of the living. I told myself I'd imagined it, that isolation had played tricks on me. But that doesn't explain the scratches on my arms, or the faint handprints on the inside of the car window. I'll never know what those things were, or why they were waiting for me in that cabin. But I know this. Sometimes solitude isn't peaceful. It's a trap set for the living by something that doesn't belong in our world. And it almost had me. The crunch of gravel beneath the tires was the first thing that struck me. That, and the way the towering pines swallowed the light whole. The rental cabin looked like it had been sitting there for decades, nestled in the woods just outside of Asheville. It wasn't on the map. Not really. The listing on the site was vague. Rustic charm for nature lovers. And the directions were handwritten by the owner, complete with warnings about spotty GPS. It was my first night alone in years. No roommates, no partner, no one asking me for a thing. Just me, a couple of horror novels, and a weekend of silence. Heaven, right? I stepped out of the car, the late October air biting at my skin. The cabin was unassuming, wooden slats weathered gray, a roof that slumped slightly, and windows fogged with grime. It was perched on a slight hill, overlooking a lake that glittered under the sliver of moonlight. The first thing I noticed inside was the smell. Damp wood and something faintly sour, like milk left too long in the sun. I told myself it was normal for old cabins. The second thing was the silence. Not the comforting quiet I'd imagined, but an oppressive, heavy stillness. Even the frogs and crickets outside seemed muted. I unpacked quickly, shoving my bag into the only bedroom, before making myself a mug of cocoa. By 9 p.m., I was curled up in an old armchair, with a tattered blanket, book in hand. I thought I'd feel at peace. Instead, I felt watched. It was subtle at first, that weird sixth sense we all get sometimes. But then, halfway through a chapter, I caught it. The unmistakable sound of floorboards creaking. My eyes darted to the hallway. Empty. It's an old house, I mumbled to myself. Houses creak. It's nothing. But my gut churned, because the creak hadn't come from just anywhere. It was right outside the bedroom door. I closed the book, stood up, and walked over, trying to steady my breathing. The hallway stretched into darkness, broken only by the faint outline of the bedroom door. I stepped closer, flipping the light switch. Nothing happened. The bulb above me flickered and stayed dead. Another creak. Not the wood this time. This was behind me. The living room window. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. The chair I'd been sitting in was now turned slightly, facing the window. I hadn't touched it. I would have heard if it scraped across the floor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. Just the wind rattling the trees outside. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was paranoia. Maybe I hadn't noticed the chair before. I locked the front door, checked the windows, and double-checked the back door before heading to bed. My skin prickled as I lay there in the dark, every creak and groan of the cabin amplified by the silence. But nothing happened. I drifted off eventually. I don't know what woke me. Maybe the cold, maybe the silence. But at 3:17 a.m., my eyes snapped open. I wasn't alone. There was breathing, slow, deliberate, not mine. I froze, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding in my ears. It was coming from the corner of the room. My phone was on the nightstand. Slowly, painstakingly, I turned my head, reaching for it. The glow of the screen lit up the room. There was nothing in the corner, but the bedroom door was open. I didn't leave it open. I bolted upright, grabbing the nearest thing, a lamp, and stumbled toward the door. The hallway stretched out in front of me, bathed in faint moonlight from the windows. The living room was silent. Still. Empty. Then I heard it. Faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the front porch. "Is someone there?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Tap, tap, tap. I tiptoed toward the front door, every step making my heart pound harder. The tapping grew louder as I approached. Through the frosted glass of the window, I could make out a faint shape, tall, unmoving. I swallowed hard, pressing my ear to the door. The tapping stopped. Then something hit the door. Hard. I jumped back as it rattled on its hinges. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. I sprinted for the bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, but there was no signal. Then I heard it. The scraping of metal against wood. The sound of the front door unlocking. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, backing up until I hit the far wall. The scraping stopped. Then silence. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The first light of dawn crept through the window. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the cabin was empty. But on the floor, carved deep into the wood, were two words: "Come back." I didn't, and I never will. I didn't leave that cabin with much. Just my bag, my car keys, and the gnawing certainty that I'd narrowly escaped something far beyond human. The moment my tires hit the main road, I didn't look back. Not at the woods, not at the cabin, and definitely not at the shadow I thought I saw standing in the porch window. I should have driven straight home, but there was this itch in the back of my mind. You know that feeling when something doesn't make sense, but you can't let it go? That cabin wasn't on any map. The directions were handwritten. The entire experience screamed wrong, and I needed to know why. So instead of heading back to my apartment, I drove straight into town. It was early morning by the time I parked at a diner, the kind of place where the locals hung out and knew everything about everyone. I walked in, still shaken, and ordered coffee, figuring out how to phrase the question without sounding like a lunatic. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, refilled my cup and asked, "Rough night?" "You could say that," I replied. "I rented a cabin out past the lake. Thought I'd get some peace and quiet." She froze, her hand gripping the coffee pot. "Which cabin?" I described it. The hill, the lake, the porch. She set the pot down carefully and leaned in close. Sweetheart, that cabin's been empty for decades. My stomach turned. No, it hasn't. I stayed there last night. Found it online. Her expression darkened. You can't find that cabin online. Not anymore. Not since the fire. The diner suddenly felt colder. What fire? She glanced around, lowering her voice like she was afraid someone might hear. Years ago, a family rented that cabin. Husband, wife, little boy. They were city folk, out for a weekend in the woods. One night something happened. Neighbors said they heard screaming, saw strange lights in the trees. By the time anyone got there, the place was gone, burned to ash. They never found the family. Just the boy's teddy bear, charred and sitting on the front porch. I didn't know what to say. My mouth went dry, but it's still there. The cabin. I stayed there. She shook her head. Whatever you saw, it wasn't the cabin. At least, not the one that burned down. I pushed my coffee aside, suddenly nauseous. My mind raced back to last night. The chair that moved, the open door, the tapping, the message carved into the floorboards. Come back. I stumbled out of the diner without another word, fumbling with my car keys. The waitress didn't try to stop me, but as I pulled away, I saw her watching from the window, her face pale and tight with worry. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I got home, unpacked, and pretended it never happened. But things followed me. Little things at first, shadows that didn't belong, the faint smell of sour milk in my apartment. Then, the tapping started again. Not on the porch this time, but on the inside of my closet door. Last night, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. There was a message scrawled on my bathroom mirror in wet streaks. You never left. This morning, I checked my emails. There's a new listing in my inbox. Same cabin, same handwritten directions. I deleted it, but the message won't go away. Every time I refresh, it's there, waiting, calling me back. I don't think I'll survive if I answer, but I'm not sure I'll survive if I don't. It started with a buzzing fluorescent light overhead, one of those that flicker in just the wrong rhythm to dig under your skin. I was midway through another night shift at the 24-hour gas station just off Route 17. You know the kind, reeking of old coffee, shelves lined with stale chips, and the perpetual hum of the ice cream freezer. That night, a fog rolled in thicker than I'd ever seen, swallowing up the world outside. The highway was nothing but black asphalt disappearing into a wall of gray. I hated working these shifts alone, but we'd just lost our only other night clerk. Guess it was my turn to hold down the fort until corporate hired someone new. It wasn't long before the first weird thing happened. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard it. A faint tapping, like fingernails drumming against glass. It came from the front window. At first, I thought it was just some bug drawn to the neon open sign, but the sound was deliberate, methodical. Tap, tap, tap. I glanced up from the register, squinting through the fog-drenched pane. For a second, I thought I saw a shadow move. Hello? My voice cracked, embarrassing me even in my solitude. No answer. Steeling myself, I stepped out from behind the counter and moved closer to the glass. My breath fogged up the pane as I leaned in, searching for movement. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A hand. Pale, long fingers, almost skeletal, reached up and pressed against the outside of the glass. My heart leapt into my throat. I stumbled back, knocking over a rack of potato chips. The hand was gone. I fumbled for the phone, but of course, the damn landline had been out for days. Cell service out here? Forget it. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I convinced myself it was a prank. Some drunk weirdo messing around. but deep down, I knew better. I sat back behind the counter, trying to focus on restocking cigarettes and lottery tickets. For a while, it was quiet again, save for the buzz of that stupid light. Then the power flickered, plunging the store into a brief, suffocating darkness. When the light snapped back on, something wasn't right. One of the aisles, the one with the cheap candy, had been knocked over. Candy bars scattered across the floor. No way had that been like that before. I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the counter and stepped into the aisle. My palms were slick with sweat. "Is someone here?" I called out. My voice echoed against the empty shelves. No answer. Then, the freezer door slammed shut behind me. I whipped around, flashlight trembling in my hand. The freezer doors gleamed under the flickering light, their surfaces coated with condensation. Slowly, I moved toward them, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air seemed colder than it should have been, like the chill from the freezers had leaked into the entire store. My breath puffed out in short, nervous clouds. And then I saw it. One of the glass doors had fogged over, and written in the condensation, in long, jagged letters, were the words, "Look behind you." I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. My throat felt tight, like something invisible was wrapping around it. I didn't want to turn. Every cell in my body screamed, "Don't turn around." But I did. The flashlight beam swept over the empty aisles, shaking as I scanned for anything out of place. There was nothing, just shelves of junk food and energy drinks. The fogged-up window near the entrance. The door I swore I had locked earlier, now standing slightly ajar. A tendril of fog, curling in like a lazy, creeping snake. And then, movement. At the edge of the beam, something darted between the shelves. Not walking, crawling. I backed up toward the counter, flashlight shaking. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. It appeared then, just for a second, peeking out from the corner of the pet food aisle. A face. But it wasn't a face. No eyes, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched unnaturally tight over bone. The thing leaned out farther, its head cocking to one side like it was studying me. Then it scuttled out of sight, faster than anything human should move. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted toward the front door, slamming into the glass, fumbling with the lock. My fingers felt clumsy, the cold making them numb. Behind me, I heard it again, the tapping. But this time, it was everywhere. From the freezer doors, the windows, even the ceiling. Tap, tap, tap. The door finally gave way, and I stumbled out into the fog. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop running. The gas pumps were barely visible through the haze, their lights dim and flickering. That's when I heard the voice. "Where are you going?" It came from all directions, deep and rasping, like someone trying to talk through a throat full of gravel. I turned, flashlight beam slicing through the fog, and saw them. Dozens of them. Figures, crawling on all fours, their faceless heads tilted unnaturally. Their pale bodies seemed to shimmer, half solid, like they were caught between this world and another. They were closing in, surrounding me. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran for my car. The keys were in my pocket, but my hands were shaking so badly, it felt like it took an eternity to pull them out. The flashlight slipped from my grip and rolled away, its beam casting eerie shadows as it spun. I finally got the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut. The fog pressed against the windows, thick and oppressive, and the creatures were there, circling the car. Their hands scraped against the glass, leaving smears of condensation behind. I turned the key in the ignition, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The engine sputtered once, twice, before roaring to life. The creatures froze, their heads snapping toward me in unison. For a moment, everything was silent. Then they screamed. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, high-pitched, guttural, like 1,000 voices crying out in agony. They lunged at the car, their hands slamming against the windows, their bodies writhing and twisting in impossible ways. I floored it. The tires squealed as I shot forward, the creatures scattering in the headlights. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove through the fog, the empty highway stretching out before me like a lifeline. Eventually, the fog lifted. The gas station disappeared in my rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness. I quit the next day. I still don't know what I saw that night. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear it. The tapping. And I can't help but wonder if they ever really let me go. The diner where I worked night shifts wasn't anything special. Just a run-of-the-mill greasy spoon sitting off a desolate highway in the middle of nowhere. Most nights were uneventful, serving truckers, wiping counters, and flipping through an ancient magazine to pass the hours. But that night was different. It started when the clock on the wall chimed midnight, a ritual so mundane that I usually didn't notice it. This time, though, the sound stretched on longer than it should have, like the chime was being dragged, distorted, pulled apart. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed and flickered, sending the room into brief bursts of darkness. I glanced toward the door, half hoping to see a customer walk in and break the eerie silence. Instead, the night outside seemed thicker than usual, the parking lot lights barely piercing the foggy darkness. Then the bell above the door jingled. No one had walked in. That's when I noticed the booth at the far end of the diner. It was occupied. I hadn't heard anyone come in. The man sitting there had his back to me. He wore a black jacket, the kind with a hood, though it was down. His dark hair was greasy and matted, and he sat perfectly still, staring out the window into the nothingness beyond. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't turn around. Great. Another weirdo. I grabbed the coffee pot and walked over, the sound of my sneakers sticking to the linoleum, filling the oppressive silence. "Coffee?" He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were glassy, unblinking. "Do you ever wonder," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "what's watching when you're alone?" I froze, coffee pot trembling in my hand. What?" His lips curled into a grin, not a friendly one. Before I could respond, the lights in the diner flickered again. The man's grin widened, and when the lights steadied, the booth was empty. My stomach dropped. The coffee pot slipped from my fingers, shattering on the floor. And then, I heard it. A faint tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the kitchen. I stood frozen, staring at the shards of glass and the growing puddle of coffee at my feet. The tapping continued, echoing from the kitchen in the back. Each sound felt deliberate, as if whatever was making it wanted me to know it was there. My mind raced through rational explanations. Maybe it was a raccoon that got in through the back door. Maybe it was just the pipes. Maybe I was imagining things. But none of those thoughts made my legs stop trembling. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. The diner was dead silent now, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and that god-awful tapping. I knew I had to check. As much as I wanted to grab my keys and bolt for my car, my feet betrayed me. I stepped cautiously toward the kitchen, every squeak of my sneakers against the linoleum, sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. The door to the kitchen was ajar, swinging slightly as if it had just been pushed open. The fluorescent light above it flickered erratically. "Anyone there?" I asked, louder this time. The tapping stopped. My breath hitched, and I clenched my fists to keep them from shaking. I stepped through the door and scanned the room. Everything was where it should be. The counters, the griddle, the industrial sink, nothing out of place. Until I saw the freezer door. It was cracked open. I knew I'd closed it. I was sure of it. The freezer was old, and it didn't stay cool unless it was properly latched. I edged closer, feeling the cold air snake out and brush against my skin. The tapping resumed, louder now, and it was definitely coming from inside the freezer. I reached out, my hand trembling as I grabbed the handle. Slowly, I pulled it open. The smell hit me first, metallic, rancid, and suffocating. Inside, the shelves were empty, save for a single object on the middle rack. It was a jar. The glass was smeared with something dark and viscous, and inside a mass of something pulsed faintly, as though alive. My stomach churned, but before I could back away, I heard a voice. "I told you," it whispered, low and guttural. I spun around, and there he was, the man from the booth, now standing in the doorway of the kitchen. His head tilted unnaturally to the side, and his grin was stretched wider than before, exposing teeth that were jagged and wrong. "You ever wonder what's watching?" he hissed, his voice distorted, like static on an old TV. I stumbled back, my foot slipping on the slick freezer floor. The jar fell from the shelf, shattering on the ground. The thing inside spilled out, a writhing, fleshy mass that began to grow. It unfurled long, spindly limbs that slapped against the walls, its surface glistening with a black, tar-like substance. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, as the creature turned toward me, its eyeless face twisted and shifted, its mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal rows of jagged teeth. "Run," the man said, his voice almost gleeful. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted out of the kitchen, through the diner, and into the foggy night. My car was the only thing I could think of, my sanctuary from whatever nightmare was unfolding behind me. As I reached the parking lot, I glanced back at the diner. The windows were dark, but I could see movement inside, shadows slithering across the walls, something too large to fit in that tiny kitchen. I jumped into my car, fumbled with the keys, and finally got the engine roaring. Tires screeching, I tore out of the lot, leaving the diner and its horrors behind. But as I sped down the empty highway, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror. The man was standing in the middle of the road, his grin still stretched wide, his hand raised in a slow, mocking wave. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I quit the diner the next day, but some nights, when the world is too quiet, I swear I can still hear the tapping. It started like any other night shift. The fluorescent lights in the back room of the gas station flickered with their usual irritating hum. I'd taken this job for the quiet. Somewhere I could collect my thoughts while dealing with the odd customer or two, mostly truckers and night owls. I'd been working there for 6 months without incident. That night, though, was different. It was the dead of winter, and a brutal windstorm had turned the streets into a graveyard of fallen branches and trash. I leaned against the counter, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, when the door chimed. A man walked in. His face was shrouded in the shadow of a hoodie, and he moved deliberately, too deliberate for someone who just wanted chips or smokes. Something about him immediately set my nerves on edge. He didn't look at me, didn't grab anything. He just wandered the aisles like he was searching for something. The cameras buzzed overhead. I glanced up at the monitors above the counter. I'd grown used to watching people on those screens. Most were harmless, predictable. But as I scanned the feeds, my stomach turned. There was a glitch in the camera. A second figure flickered into view behind the man. Tall, thin, its limbs too long for its body. Its head tilted unnaturally as it watched him. I blinked hard, thinking it was a software issue. But when I looked back up, the figure was gone. The man finally approached the counter, dropping a pack of gum and a small black notebook onto the surface. I rang him up, barely able to meet his eyes. "You working alone tonight?" he asked. It was a simple question, but the way he said it made my skin crawl. His voice was low, grating, like the sound of gravel under tires. "Yeah," I replied, regretting it instantly. He grinned, revealing teeth that were uneven and stained. He paid in cash, shoved the change into his pocket, and left without another word. But as the door swung shut, I noticed something he'd left behind. The notebook. It was small and weathered, its cover marked with a symbol I didn't recognize. My gut told me to leave it alone, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open. The pages were filled with numbers, rows and rows of handwritten code that made no sense to me. Then at the bottom of one page, I saw something that made my breath hitch. "Do not stay until 3:17 a.m. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:48. For the next 29 minutes, I tried to shake it off as some kind of prank. But as the hour approached, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered, longer than usual. The cameras in the corner started to glitch again, showing static interspersed with brief, distorted images of the store. And then there were the noises, soft, guttural whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At 3:16, the power went out completely. The store plunged into darkness, save for the faint blinking glow of the exit sign. And then the door chimed again. The chime echoed unnaturally in the silent store. My stomach knotted as the air around me turned cold, like I'd stepped into a meat locker. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to scan the darkness. The aisles stretched out like corridors to nowhere, and the shadows seemed to writhe at the edges of the beam. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, trembling. No answer. The chime came again. The door hadn't opened. It was still shut, but the sound repeated over and over, like someone was walking in and out, or something was toying with me. Then a sound from the back room, a dragging noise, heavy and wet, like a sack of meat being pulled across the floor. My body froze, my breathing shallow. The noise stopped, replaced by a faint clicking sound, like fingernails tapping glass. I slowly aimed my flashlight toward the office door. It creaked open, just a crack, revealing only darkness within. "Who's there?" I whispered, barely audible even to myself. A voice answered, low and distorted. "You should have left." I nearly dropped my phone. The voice came from everywhere, above me, behind me, inside me. I took a step back, my heel catching the edge of the counter. That's when I saw it on the cameras. The monitors, somehow still active despite the power outage, showed the store from every angle, and in every feed, it was there. The thing I'd seen earlier, flickering like a broken signal. It stood impossibly tall, its head brushing the ceiling. Its body was grotesquely elongated, with limbs that bent in ways no humans should. Its face was nothing but a void, darker than the surrounding shadows. It moved slowly down the aisle, its steps silent but deliberate, coming straight toward me. I spun around, shining my light. Nothing was there. Yet on the cameras, it was only feet away. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I bolted for the back door. The dragging sound started again, louder now, as if it were right behind me. I reached the door and shoved it open, stumbling into the freezing night air. The parking lot was empty, the wind howling through the trees. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Fumbling with the keys, I started the engine and peeled out of the lot. The rear-view mirror taunted me. I couldn't bring myself to look at it, terrified of what I might see. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window and sat in my living room, shaking. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from an unknown number. "You forgot the notebook." My blood ran cold. I didn't respond, didn't sleep, didn't even move for the rest of the night. When morning came, I called my manager and quit. I never went back to that gas station. Weeks later, I saw a news report. A night shift worker at the same gas station had gone missing. The police found the store in disarray, the back room smeared with streaks of something unidentifiable. They never found the worker, or any evidence of who or what had been there. I've kept the story to myself all these years, but every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I hear it again. That chime. And I know it hasn't forgotten. I was deep in the Arizona desert, driving my rig on a night run. I don't usually take these kinds of shifts, but the extra pay was too good to pass up. The load was nothing unusual. Pallets of canned food heading to some supermarket in California. Just me, my truck, and miles of empty road. But this wasn't just any night. The moon hung low and bloated, casting the kind of pale light that makes shadows seem alive. About 2 hours past midnight, I was on a stretch of Route 95, a desolate ribbon of asphalt with nothing but sand and scrub for company. That's when I saw them. Flickering headlights up ahead, faint and wavering, like a mirage. A car stranded in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down. Out here, leaving someone stranded could mean death. My headlights washed over the scene as I pulled closer. An old sedan, doors open, hazard lights blinking weakly. No sign of anyone around. I parked my rig a safe distance away and grabbed my flashlight. My gut was already doing that uneasy twist, but I couldn't just leave without checking. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the desert night. No answer. I walked toward the car, shining my light into the driver's seat. Empty. The passenger's side? Empty. The trunk was closed, but the whole thing reeked of abandonment. Then I saw it. Drag marks in the dirt, leading away from the car and into the scrubland. They weren't deep, but they were fresh. 2 parallel lines, like something, or someone, had been pulled away. I thought about getting back in my truck and calling it in, but something compelled me to follow. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was stupidity. Probably both. The tracks led me about 200 yards off the road to a shallow ravine. The flashlight beam danced over the rocks and sand, catching something glinting below. A piece of fabric, red, torn, and snagged on a branch. My heart was hammering now. Every survival instinct screaming at me to leave. Then I heard it. A low guttural sound, almost like breathing, but wrong. Like a deep, wet rasp that echoed faintly in the stillness. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The sound came again, closer this time. "Is someone out there?" I called, barely managing to keep the quiver out of my voice. No response. I edged closer to the edge of the ravine, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a person, crouched low to the ground. But as my light hit it, the shape flinched, its body twisted in ways no human could manage. Its skin was pale and stretched too tightly over a skeletal frame. Long arms, almost insect-like, ended in hands with fingers that were too long. And the eyes, those black sunken pits, locked onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it let out a sound, a shriek that pierced the night, so high and sharp it felt like it was slicing through my skull. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. Whatever it was, I didn't want to know if it was following me. My feet pounded the sand as I sprinted back to the truck, my lungs burning and heart threatening to burst out of my chest. I reached the rig, scrambled into the cab, and locked the doors. My hands fumbled for the keys, but they slipped from my sweaty fingers. The shriek came again, closer this time, and I could swear I heard the sound of something scraping against metal. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the truck into gear. Gravel sprayed as I tore back onto the highway, my eyes darting between the road and the side mirrors. For a few minutes, all I could hear was the hum of the engine and the pounding of my heart. Then, in the distance, the figure appeared in my headlights again. It wasn't on the road this time. It was perched on the rocks just beyond the shoulder, crouched and watching as I sped past. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, my nerves frayed and hands still shaking. I told the gas station attendant about the abandoned car, left a call for the sheriff, and got back in the truck. I never found out what happened to whoever was in that sedan. I didn't want to know. But sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm out on the road, I still think about those eyes in the dark, and I wonder if they're out there, watching, waiting for the next trucker to pull over. It's been years since that night, and I've tried to push it out of my mind. I've driven thousands of miles, hauled countless loads, and seen my fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing has ever come close to that night on Route 95. I did my best to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was a wild animal, something deformed or injured, though deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The way it moved, the way it watched me, it was no animal, and certainly not human. About a month after the incident, I heard something on the radio that made my stomach churn. A local news station was covering the disappearance of a young couple who had been traveling through the desert. I was deep in the Arizona desert, driving my rig on a night run. I don't usually take these kinds of shifts, but the extra pay was too good to pass up. The load was nothing unusual, pallets of canned food heading to some supermarket in California. Just me, my truck, and miles of empty road. But this wasn't just any night. The moon hung low and bloated, casting the kind of pale light that makes shadows seem alive. About 2 hours past midnight, I was on a stretch of Route 95, a desolate ribbon of asphalt with nothing but sand and scrub for company. That's when I saw them, flickering headlights up ahead, faint and wavering, like a mirage. A car stranded in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down. Out here, leaving someone stranded could mean death. My headlights washed over the scene as I pulled closer. An old sedan, doors open, hazard lights blinking weakly. No sign of anyone around. I parked my rig a safe distance away and grabbed my flashlight. My gut was already doing that uneasy twist, but I couldn't just leave without checking. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the desert night. No answer. I walked toward the car, shining my light into the driver's seat. Empty. The passenger side? Empty. The trunk was closed, but the whole thing reeked of abandonment. Then I saw it. Drag marks in the dirt, leading away from the car and into the scrubland. They weren't deep, but they were fresh. 2 parallel lines, like something, or someone, had been pulled away. I thought about getting back in my truck and calling it in, but something compelled me to follow. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was stupidity, probably both. The tracks led me about 200 yards off the road, to a shallow ravine. The flashlight beam danced over the rocks and sand, catching something glinting below. A piece of fabric, red, torn, and snagged on a branch. My heart was hammering now, every survival instinct screaming at me to leave. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound, almost like breathing, but wrong, like a deep, wet rasp that echoed faintly in the stillness. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The sound came again, closer this time. "Is someone out there?" I called, barely managing to keep the quiver out of my voice. No response. I edged closer to the edge of the ravine, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a person, crouched low to the ground. But as my light hit it, the shape flinched. Its body twisted in ways no human could manage. Its skin was pale and stretched too tightly over a skeletal frame. Long arms, almost insect-like, ended in hands with fingers that were too long. And the eyes, those black sunken pits, locked onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it let out a sound, a shriek that pierced the night, so high and sharp it felt like it was slicing through my skull. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. Whatever it was, I didn't want to know if it was following me. My feet pounded the sand as I sprinted back to the truck, my lungs burning and heart threatening to burst out of my chest. I reached the rig, scrambled into the cab, and locked the doors. My hands fumbled for the keys, but they slipped from my sweaty fingers. The shriek came again, closer this time, and I could swear I heard the sound of something scraping against metal. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the truck into gear. Gravel sprayed as I tore back onto the highway, my eyes darting between the road and the side mirrors. For a few minutes, all I could hear was the hum of the engine and the pounding of my heart. Then, in the distance, the figure appeared in my headlights again. It wasn't on the road this time. It was perched on the rocks just beyond the shoulder, crouched and watching as I sped past. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, my nerves frayed and hands still shaking. I told the gas station attendant about the abandoned car, left a call for the sheriff, and got back in the truck. I never found out what happened to whoever was in that sedan. I didn't want to know. But sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm out on the road, I still think about those eyes in the dark, and I wonder if they're out there, watching, waiting for the next trucker to pull over. It's been years since that night, and I've tried to push it out of my mind. I've driven thousands of miles, hauled countless loads, and seen my fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing has ever come close to that night on Route 95. I did my best to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was a wild animal, something deformed or injured, though deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The way it moved, the way it watched me, it was no animal, and certainly not human. About a month after the incident, I heard something on the radio that made my stomach churn. A local news station was covering the disappearance of a young couple who had been traveling through the desert. It started with a hiss, not the sound a snake makes, but the distinct, sharp hiss of air escaping, like a tire losing its life on a lonely stretch of highway. I was 2 hours into my haul, somewhere between Amarillo and the middle of nowhere, when my right front tire decided it had had enough. Truckers call this route the dead strip. A lot of things die here. Tires, trucks, sometimes even people. But what most don't know is that it's not just the name. This road has a reputation for weirdness. I didn't believe the stories until I became one of them. I pulled the rig over at mile marker 233, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped into the cold embrace of the desert night. The highway stretched on in both directions, like an eternal black ribbon, and the stars above glared down, mocking my solitude. The tire was, as I suspected, toast. I cursed under my breath, glancing down the empty road. Not a single pair of headlights for miles. I had no choice. I needed to get the spare. That's when I heard it. A low, whispering hum. It wasn't the wind or the distant call of coyotes. It was wrong. I froze. The flashlight beam flickered for a moment, then steadied. The sound grew louder, circling me, and for a second I swore I felt a breath, hot and rancid, against the back of my neck. I whipped around, my heart pounding like a hammer in my chest, but there was nothing. Just my truck, the desert, and the endless stretch of highway. My hand hovered over the flashlight switch, itching to turn it off and dive back into the cab. But something, call it stupid curiosity, or the need to prove I wasn't losing my mind, kept me outside. That's when I saw it. In the distance, maybe 50 yards off the road, there was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally so, and its limbs seemed stretched, like someone had taken a person and pulled at the edges. Its head was tilted at an angle, and though it was too far away to see its face, I knew it was staring at me. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly, I was back in the cab, locking the doors and fumbling to start the engine. My hands were trembling, and the key slipped in the ignition twice before I finally got it right. The truck roared to life, but as I glanced at the side mirror, my blood turned to ice. The thing was closer. I don't know how it moved without making a sound, but it was there, just 10 feet from the rear trailer. Its head tilted again, and for the briefest second, I saw its eyes reflected in the mirror. 2 pale orbs, hollow and endless. I slammed on the gas. The truck groaned under the sudden pressure, but it lurched forward, tires screaming against the asphalt. The thing didn't follow, at least not that I could see. For miles, I drove like a bat out of hell, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. But the humming didn't stop. It was inside the cab now, faint but persistent, like a song stuck on the edge of your mind. I reached a rest stop near mile marker 245, desperate to shake the unease clinging to my skin. There was another rig parked there, and the sight of a fellow trucker felt like salvation. I pulled in, parked, and climbed out, eager to share my story and prove to myself that I wasn't going insane. The other driver was sitting on the hood of his truck, smoking a cigarette. His face was shadowed under a baseball cap, but he gave me a nod as I approached. "You all right, man?" he asked, his voice rough but calm. I hesitated. "Yeah. Just had a weird night. You seen anything strange around here?" He took a long drag of his cigarette, the ember glowing like a dying star. "Strange how?" I opened my mouth to explain, but then I saw it. The reflection in the window of his cab. The thing was there, standing just behind him, its face inches from his shoulder, its mouth twisted into a grin that stretched far too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Get in your truck," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What?" "Get in your truck," I shouted this time, grabbing his arm and yanking him towards the door. He dropped the cigarette, cursing, but when he turned to see what I was looking at, the color drained from his face. We didn't speak as we climbed into our respective cabs and sped away from the rest stop. The thing didn't follow, but the humming stayed with me, growing louder with every mile. I didn't stop again until I reached the truck stop at the edge of the state line. The other driver pulled in beside me, and we both sat there in silence, engines idling. Finally, he rolled down his window and said, "You're not crazy. I've seen it before." "What is it?" I asked, my voice shaking. He just shook his head. "Don't know. Don't want to know. But it's tied to that stretch of highway. Once you see it, you don't go back." That was the last thing he said before he pulled out and disappeared into the night. As for me, I still drive, but I avoid mile marker 233 like my life depends on it. Because it does. I tried to forget. For weeks after that night, I avoided the dead strip like the plague, took longer routes, ate up more fuel, and lost time on deliveries. Didn't care. Safety wasn't a cost. It was survival. But life's funny like that. It doesn't care about your plans. Dispatch gave me a new assignment, a cross-country haul to Phoenix with a tight deadline. The route? Straight through the dead strip. I argued, even considered quitting. But when you've got bills stacking up and a truck that's practically held together by duct tape and prayers, choices start looking less like choices and more like traps. So, there I was, rumbling down that cursed stretch of asphalt once again. The radio was off, the windows sealed tight, and every muscle in my body was coiled like a spring. The hum didn't start right away. In fact, the first 50 miles passed in relative peace. But as soon as I crossed the line into the dead strip, it returned. A faint vibration, just below the edge of hearing, like a swarm of invisible insects crawling inside my skull. I clenched the wheel, my eyes darting between the road and the mirrors. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, a constant reminder of my own fragility. Mile marker, 230 passed, then 231. By the time 233 came into view, I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. That's when I saw it. This time, it wasn't just the tall, stretched figure. No, there were 3 of them, and they weren't waiting by the roadside. They were in the middle of the highway, standing shoulder to shoulder, their hollow eyes fixed on me. Not again, I muttered, slamming my foot on the brakes. The rig screeched in protest, the trailer swaying dangerously as the tires struggled to grip the pavement. The truck came to a halt just feet from the figures, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then they moved, their heads tilted in unison, grotesquely jerking to the side, as if studying me. One stepped closer, its elongated limbs bending at impossible angles. I fumbled for the gear shift, desperate to reverse, but before I could react, it reached out and touched the hood of my truck. The engine died instantly. The lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. "Come on," I whispered, turning the key in the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. The hum was deafening now, filling the cab with a suffocating pressure. My breath came in shallow gasps as the figures circled the truck, their movements slow and deliberate. One of them climbed onto the hood, its pale face inches from the windshield. Its mouth moved, but the words were lost in the overwhelming hum. It raised a skeletal hand and pressed it against the glass, leaving behind a smear of dark, oily residue. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I grabbed the flashlight from the seat beside me and shone it directly into its face. The reaction was immediate. It recoiled with a shriek that pierced through the hum, a sound so high-pitched it made my teeth ache. The others froze, their hollow eyes glaring at the light. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed the crowbar I kept under the seat, kicked the driver's door open, and bolted